right. Welcome everyone to Bigfoot Society. We have a great interview for you all tonight and for the ones that are listening on the podcast later on. Um, we have a few things that we want to discuss, definitely. First thing is next week we have a great show coming up. I want to mention that as well. We have our friend Asher's. And we're going to be talking about all sorts of fun thing. We're going to be talking about different cryptids. I think we're going to be talking about maybe some Land Between the Lakes and maybe some Mothman as well, and all sorts of good stuff. So you'll want to tune in next week as well. But this week we have a very awesome interview. Before I go into that, I want to make sure that you can. I see a few people hanging out with us. If you can see, or if you can hear my voice, rather, go ahead and let me know in the chat that sounds good to go, just to make sure that the audio is good. All right. And we got a few people hanging out. Let's just shout that as well. We got Aaron from Hey Strangers, yay, Jeremiah. And we got Bigfoot Non, awesome. But yeah, Hey Strangers, just let me know if it sounds good. He says, handsome as heck. Well, thanks, buddy. Just let me know if the audio is good. But I appreciate that. Once we hear that the audio is good, then we'll be chugging along here. Let's see. I'll start giving a bio for our guest tonight. We've got Mr. Ken Gerhard. He's a widely recognized cryptozoologist and field investigator for the Center for Fortean Zoology, as well as a fellow of the Pangea Institute and consultant for several research organizations. Of course, you've seen him on many different shows. Some that come to mind would be Missing in Alaska, Monster Quest, among others. And he's also been an adventurer around the world. He's gone to some places such as the Amazon, the Galapagos, the Australian outback, many different places, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, and the list goes on and on. But we're going to bring him on in a minute. But just to let you know, this interview will go for about an hour. I've got some questions to ask Ken. And then about halfway through, we'll bring in some audience questions. So if you have any questions for Ken, which I hope you do, definitely put those in the comment section and make sure you put the banner here. Use the word question at the beginning so that you know that, or rather so that it's easy for me to see it. So cool. Let me go back to, and we got Asher's hanging out here. Hey, buddy. Good to see you as well. But let's, without further ado here, let's bring my friend Ken into the stage. And we will, there we go. Hello, Ken. How's it going?
Good evening, Jeremiah. I'm doing well this evening. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's pretty nice and sunny up here in Iowa, so I can't complain. And I get to talk about cryptozoology and Bigfoot on a Friday night, which is my highlight of the week.
Always a good thing.
Some cool people. So I got a question. We already went over your bio. I think you heard that, you down in the green room. So our listeners that are hanging out with us, they know exactly what they're in for. But most people have heard of you, Ken, I would imagine as well. I had the privilege of meeting Ken a little bit at the Van Meter Visitor Festival, which was a real treat. That was very cool to see you hanging out there with all your books, and got my copy of The Essential Guide to Bigfoot, which is, when I'm talking to people and they're like, man, what book should I get? And I'm like, literally, you need to get this book by Ken because it is so good. It's got everything in one handy book, and it's very easy to read. So thank you for putting that together, definitely, for the community. It's very cool, Ken.
Thank you, Jeremiah. I appreciate your kind words. I'm very, very proud of the book. And, it's not, what I tell people is that, even though my name's on the cover, I mean, there were a lot of people that I interviewed and borrowed from. Peter Byrne was gracious to write the foreword, of course. And I interviewed, Meldrum, Barrickman, Coleman, Stufert, Prescott, Perez. I mean, everyone, Steenberg, everyone in the field that I thought had put a lot of time and years into research, because they're all, there are a lot of many great resources in the field in terms of researchers with longevity and that have really put a lot of effort into it. So
Totally, and it puts them all together. I love that. Well, I like the question to start out with. Usually is, was there a point in your life that set you down this road to cryptozoology? There must have been something that just set you off in your earlier years. Is there anything that comes to mind?
yeah, that's probably the number one question most people
Yeah.
ask me. It is kind of an unconventional life choice, and I feel very blessed to have had the opportunity to pursue it. I didn't plan on becoming a cryptozoologist when I was a kid. It wasn't something I thought was possible. But you know, when I was a kid, about 8 or 9 years old, you know, my father was a forestry professor. Had a very scientific upbringing in terms of his influence. He's a PhD, and we spent a lot of time in the woods. And so I love the outdoors and critters, creatures. My first pet was a Cayman alligator. I
Oh, wow.
collected snakes and salamanders and everything. And so I already loved animals and kind of all kinds of critters. But I also loved monster movies. You know, I grew up on Godzilla and, you know, all those cheesy
Awesome.
50s, you
So
know,
good.
monster movies, Creature from the Black Lagoon and all that. So when I first heard about cryptozoology and Bigfoot when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I mean, it was like, it sounded like the perfect synthesis of two things I loved, animals and monsters. And because you get a little bit of both in terms of the things that we investigate here. But
Totally, totally.
yeah, and then
Oh,
about
that's so cool.
around that same time, and this was about 1976. You know, I also saw the Minnesota Iceman exhibit at the
Oh,
Minnesota State
wow.
Fair, and that was
Cool.
influential. And then there were a lot of things going on TV with Bigfoot. There was In Search of and Legend of Boggy Creek and $6 Million Man, and so I think all of
Oh,
that just kind of hit me at the same time. But what was really huge for me was my mother. She
mm,
passed when I was younger, but
okay.
before she did, we spent many years traveling together, and she took me all over the world, and she encouraged my interest in the Yeti and Mothman and different things. And when I was 15 years old, we actually went to Loch Ness, and I got to attempt field research at a young age. So it's just something I've always
Oh,
been
yeah.
passionate about. And you know, I didn't pursue it as a career until maybe 20 years ago when I, you know, just kind of went all in. And so
Yeah, there's a lot of, if you wanna hear more about his younger years, there's some really cool tidbits that you bring out in the book, specifically this one, The Essential Guide to Bigfoot. I mean, you talk about, like, uh, having a filming video around Loch Ness at around age 15, right? I wanna say that's what it calls out. But then, also, it's very cool that you call out another fact, is that you were born about a week or so before the Patterson-Gimlin film, correct? In
correct.
'67, like, that's a cool connection
I was born
from
on a
modern day to
Friday.
back there.
Yeah, I think that was another thing I forgot to mention. I was born on Friday the 13th, October
Friday the
13th,
13th, yeah.
1967, 1 week before the Patterson film. So when I first heard about the Patterson film, and I think the first TV show I saw in the 70s that talked about it, and when they mentioned the date that it was filmed, I almost felt like a strange connection because it was so close to the day I was born. So just
Mm,
a week apart. So
that's awesome. That is awesome. You were involved with the expedition for the Trinity Alps Salamander,
mhm.
this year. Actually, it would be last summer, right? Because it was when, a lot of different guys were filming documentaries around the Bluff Creek area, and you can see yourself in some of those. But what kind of things did you take away from that expedition where you're looking for the Trinity Alps salamander out
Yeah,
there?
thanks for mentioning that. That was
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the first week of July.
Hmm.
Um, you know, it was I really owe a huge debt of gratitude to Jamie Wayne and the rest of the guys in the Bluff Creek project because
Sure.
they, you know, they're in that area. And the giant salamanders, Trinity giant salamanders, have always kind of been an interesting mystery within a mystery in the Bigfoot world because in some of these Bigfoot books where people were out looking for Bigfoot evidence in the 50s and 60s, they would hear about giant monstrous salamanders that, you know, sometimes they would take a little side trip and say, okay, let's look for these salamanders too. So, so I'd always wanted. This has always been on my bucket list. I love
That's
amphibians and
awesome.
all salamanders, and it's an interesting cryptid. It's a viable possibility that there could be a monstrous species of salamander up in this region that's maybe a few feet long. It's not impossible.
Wow. That's
So
wild.
you have Native American traditions about them, and you have some sightings that were logged by different people through the years. So yeah, we went up there, Bluff Creek Project. Jamie Wayne in particular scouted out a location. We were on the Trinity River for several days. I brought a group from Texas and Oklahoma that included a couple of fellow Bigfoot researchers that are also interested in the salamanders. Jim Whitehead of Oklahoma, who's a brilliant guy especially in terms of salamanders and amphibian biology. And then we had Jason Concy, who's a Bigfoot researcher / elephant trainer from East Texas. And then
That's cool.
Daniel Allen Jones, who's a really excellent videographer and investigates Bigfoot, UFOs, and all kinds of things. So we tried to be as scientific as possible. I interviewed, I worked with the San Antonio Zoo, so I had access to research field biologists that actually go out and do surveys for giant salamanders in Asia and stuff. And they told us, cool. We had a lot of gadgets, underwater cameras. Jamie had this little underwater drone that we could pilot around. And so it was a really amazing experience. We didn't find any evidence of giant salamanders, only the standard giant Pacific salamanders, which are really only about 13 to 18 inches long. But we saw some amazing habitat, the Trinity River. We were up in some pretty remote areas in the Trinity National Forest. And then, the last weekend, the cherry on the cake was we got to go to the Patterson-Gimlin film site with Bluff Creek Project and camp out at Louse Camp with Alex.
So cool.
And all those, lots of really interesting and exciting people.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, just a very cool. It's almost, I think, going to be a time that people in future generations will look back at and be like, oh my goodness, you had like Gerhard and Petikoff and Hieronymus there and all these guys. And it's like, just, it'll be weird how it's talked about in the future, I think. But speaking of the San Antonio Zoo, a question I did have on my list was, you led the Chupacabra chat at the San Antonio Zoo during the Festival de Animals, which I'm probably mispronouncing, but close enough. So what was that experience? What is that like, leading a talk about the Chupacabra to maybe a group of people that are not like super into cryptozoology? Like, how was that experience?
It's always fun. I always enjoy talking about cryptozoology, no matter who the audience is, if they're willing to listen and put up with me. So, the Chupacabra exhibit at the zoo actually was not my idea. I like to think that I may have indirectly influenced them, because they know I've been volunteering there for years and they know what I do and who I am. But the San Antonio Zoo, I should say, has a long history in connection to the field of cryptozoology, dating back to Tom Slick in the late 1950s.
Interesting.
He was on the board of directors for the San Antonio Zoo, and they helped him sponsor his first Yeti expedition in Nepal. So with Peter Byrne, and then in the 1970s. So I like to tell people at the San Antonio Zoo, we're the only zoo that's ever searched for the Yeti. As far as I know, or any official cryptid. And then in the 1970s, there was a cryptid in South Texas called the Big Thunderbird, that was flying around, and the San Antonio Zoo was involved in that. And then when the quote unquote Chupacabras began appearing in the United States in 2004, just outside of San Antonio, then the first place they brought the remains of this so-called Chupacabra was to the San Antonio Zoo to get evaluated. So
that's awesome. Wow.
So the zoo's had a long history with cryptozoology, and but yeah, it was fun doing the talks. The way it was set up, I was kind of just out in the festival in the zoo at a station with a microphone, and I had a scheduled speech time, but there weren't always, because I gave several talks throughout the day, there weren't always people there when I was about ready to start. So I would just kind of start talking to the people standing by the flamingos, and hey, this is the legend of the Chupacabra. We have one on exhibit here, and sometimes
that's awesome.
Just stick around for a few minutes, but it was fun.
Yeah, they have no idea who That's so cool. That is so cool. So it sounds like actually, if you're into cryptozoology, the San Antonian Zoo should be on your list of places to visit, just for history and for a sweet chupacabra exhibit. So that's
And
pretty
I'm there
rocking.
for a couple hours, at least a couple hours every week, and so I'm
There
always
you
happy
go.
to give tours, or I interpret different exhibits, bears, Komodo dragons, or okapi or whatever. So
I love the episodes you've done with Lyle, the American Monster Tour. Are there? I know currently you have a DVD out where you can get 2 of those episodes on it.
correct.
Are there plans to maybe come out with further episodes, or was that kind of like a one-off type thing?
Well, we actually, it's a project we started a few years ago. It's taken us a long time to get to this
Mm,
point because Lyle and I are both very busy with juggling a lot of different projects at any given time. And it's putting together a documentary is, as well, many of your friends do that, Alex and others. It's a
yeah, it
very,
takes a while.
Seth Breedlove. I mean, it's a very time consuming thing. So, but we actually storyboarded several episodes, and we actually, since the theme of the show is kind of like, it's like a rock tour, but you're looking for cryptids. Since Lyle and I have both been
Right.
touring musicians, we actually had this
Exactly.
idea to do like American Monster Tour concert shirts with like all the dates and the cryptids on the back and the locations, but we never got around to that. But
Dude,
we've
those would sell. Like
we,
people would be all about them for
we
real.
we think
Yeah.
we think at some point that might be an idea. But anyways, we have some ideas storyboarded in terms of other episodes, but it's just, honestly, it's the resources, because to film with really high quality cameras, to have all the proper lighting, audio equipment, locations, crew, it's a lot, it's a big investment, and then just the time consumed, and then the cost of professional editing and sound mastering and all that.
A
So I
lot.
don't want to sound negative, but it was a learning process for both Lyle and I, since we kind of produced it. And but yeah, hopefully at some point we'll be able to maybe knock out some more episodes.
It
We'll,
was
we'll have to see.
enjoyable. I really enjoyed, and I think a lot of other people in the community did as well. So, if you're able to make some more power to you for sure.
Thank you.
Um, I'm curious. I like asking a form of this question. So imagine you're a newer cryptozoologist, uh, and you can only afford one Bigfoot book and one cryptozoology book for your bookshelf. What what are you gonna save up to buy if you could only buy those 2 books for people starting out?
And I'm sorry, one was cryptozoology, and what was the other?
Bigfoot.
Oh, Bigfoot. Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Whew, boy, that is tough. I've
Yeah.
actually ranked the top 10 Bigfoot books one time for a magazine Lyle writes for, Rue Morgue.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
They did a Bigfoot special edition magazine, and I did I thought the 10 top Bigfoot books of all time in terms of importance. And I think number one would definitely be Sasquatch, The Apes Among Us by John
Mhm.
Green, which most researchers view as the Bigfoot, one of the Bigfoot Bibles. It's just got so many accounts that Green amassed, and there's so much data, and he tells a lot of the history and stuff. So that's an important one. Number two, I would say, I know I was only supposed to go one, so I guess that would be the
That's
one if you
fine.
had to.
I'm not gonna stop you.
And they're very expensive, so
That's true. Yeah.
unless you get a paperback or a reprint. Number two is Abominable Snowman: Legend Come to Life by Ivan T.
Sanderson.
Sanderson, which was a
Yep.
book I checked out of my high school library so many times that they finally just gave it to me when I
Did they?
graduated, and said, "You're the only one that checks this book out, and your name's all through it." So I still have that copy. And then,
That's awesome.
but one of my personal favorite actually is Dr. Grover Krantz, Bigfoot
Mm.
Sasquatch Evidence, which is apparently, I think it's Cliff Barrickman's favorite book too. He and I have talked about that, or
Oh,
very
interesting.
influential. But I know Krantz, Krantz, he was a brilliant guy. I think he was a little bit vulnerable at times in terms of, yes, there were some things that maybe he was a little overzealous about. But I mean, as far as the way the data is presented in terms of the real evidence for Bigfoot, which is the Patterson Gimlin film and the footprint evidence, um, he makes it's pretty important, I think, in terms of grasping that there is a body of evidence that can be argued for
Mm,
as improbable as it may seem to scientists, but you have to do it in a scientific way. So those are three of my top ones, but man, there are so many good ones. I
it's
mean,
tough.
there are a lot of really excellent. I don't want to accidentally diss any of my friends and colleagues that have written books, because there's a
Right.
lot of good ones. As far as cryptozoology, I mean, the Cryptozoology Bible is probably on the trail of unknown animals by Bernard Heuvelmans, which is
Oh yeah, sure. Yep.
it's it's the book that launched cryptozoology, so to speak. So it's very important, and it also covers a wide range of cryptids. Everything from the Yeti to giant sloths in South America to giant moas and mystery cats. And so it's
Oh, awesome.
it's a little dated though, because it's over half a century
It
old.
is an older book, yeah.
So I mean, some of those things, like I think one of the things he really promotes in the book is the photo of Delois ape, the ape that was allegedly shot in 1920 in Venezuela and then propped up
Sure.
on the
Yep.
box. It's been in a lot of Bigfoot books,
Yep. Yep.
and could this be a Bigfoot or a South American ape? And it's now known that that's a hoax, or that photo was a hoax. And he kind of got taken in, Heuvelmans did, and really advocated in his book, like, we have a real photograph
Oh boy,
of an
yeah.
unknown animal here. And it's like, well, actually it was a spider
Well,
monkey that
yeah.
but anyways, that's a pinnacle book that most people should have. And more recently, I'd say Lauren Coleman's Cryptozoology A to Z is a great book.
Definitely.
Because it just covers everything, and it gives you a real concise understanding and definition of each cryptid. And so if you really like the diversity of cryptids around the world, that's a good one.
It's solid. I wish there was a second edition of it, because there's so much that has changed since that book came out in the community, and like stuff that could be added. But
True.
do you have any also advice for upcoming cryptozoologists, researchers, people just getting into the field?
Yeah, and actually there are a lot of people that reach out to me that want to pursue it, and I always encourage them to, you got to chase your dreams. But
Mm-hmm.
the younger people, and I'm always encouraged, I get emails from young people that are graduating from high school or
Sure.
getting into college, and they want to pursue it. And at a younger age, I emphasize the importance of getting an actual degree, getting at least a bachelor's in some zoology, marine biology, anthropology, any kind, because that's going to raise the credibility level of cryptozoology so much if suddenly we have, accredited,
Right.
diplomaed researchers out there and say, well, I have a degree in anthropology, so I can, for older, if you can't go back to school, which most people couldn't, once you get a little older, then what I usually tell them is, find a local researcher or a group in your area, because there's many now. Most of them are Bigfoot groups, but there are also groups that investigate Dogman or Mothman or whatever, just various cryptids. And then at least that way you can kind of network with other researchers, see what you like, see what works for you. You don't have to stick with the group forever. You can always branch off later on and do your own thing, but at least it gives you opportunities to go out and do field work and investigate things, and just kind of get a feel for it.
I like that. It's very solid advice. It's a little similar to Lyle said something kind of similar. Is like, you don't have to go to the Pacific Northwest. Become familiar with what's weird in your area and become the expert on it. And I think that's very similar to what you said, but it's smart. I mean, yeah, go to the Pacific Northwest to check it out, but like, be aware of what's in your area and that stuff too. So
yeah, eventually. And to your point, I actually have a saying for that, which I refer to that as the home field advantage. And
totally. Yeah. For real.
If you can manage to get out to a certain area every weekend or whatever, where you think there might be activity or evidence or something, then that's going to be a lot more feasible than, like you said, trying to jump around the country and figure out, I want to go
for sure
visit Lake Champlain, or it's just maybe down the line that can happen. But you can become an expert pretty quickly in your own backyard. I mean,
like I do that with Van Meter, and like sometimes, how we walked out to like the field and you can see the area where the mine was. Sometimes I go out there and just kind of like stand and watch for a while, because like people don't get the opportunity to do stuff like that unless you live nearby. So
That's true.
maybe
It's
someday I'll see something, but whatever. But
a cool
so
spot.
it's a beautiful spot for sure. So
Yeah.
everyone definitely go to that, check out that festival next year, September. Um, I want to start bringing in some audience questions. I really appreciate our listeners and people in the audience. So I'm going to start bringing some in here in the second part of the show. We've got our a friend here, Mike from Tactical Bigfoot Research. He says, "Hey, what's Ken's favorite research tool?"
Oh gosh. Well, it's going to be a lot more boring than most people. I don't have a drone yet or thermal or any of that stuff. I have access to it when I need it, but lately my favorite thing has been my 1,000 lumen tactical flashlight, which is just it's like
Mm,
small and light, but it's like if I'm in the middle of the woods and I hear something, I
yeah,
can light it up like it's a football stadium, and
that's awesome.
that's something I've discussed with other researchers because in the past there were people out there and it was like you heard something, it was right there, but maybe the flashlight just wasn't good enough to get you, to where you could see what you thought you should be seeing in that moment.
Exactly.
But you could parallel that. If flashlights aren't your thing, then just a good night vision. That whatever generation you can afford, and where you're out there and you can see, the better quality. And obviously, you always have to have some kind of camera on you, which most people do in this day and age. But I'll say this: I haven't been the biggest advocate of alleged photographic evidence when it comes to Bigfoot or cryptids. I think
Sure.
it's just a lot of it is pareidolia, and it's too easy for people to fabricate things, and there's a lot of that going on these days. But you use it to photograph the other physical trace evidence. You get angles on a footprint if you can't cast
Mhm.
it, or if you think there's an interesting formation. Or obviously if you have a video camera, it's always going to have audio, and maybe you'll need to quickly capture some vocalization or something. So you have to have the most important tool is something that you allow yourself to document whatever you find out there when
Exactly.
you're out there, whatever it is.
Exactly.
You've got to be able to take it back to a quote unquote laboratory setting, and that might
Right.
just be your workbench in your garage, where you can kind of sit back and analyze things and objectively and stuff. And that's the kind of the scientific process. So
Yeah, those are good examples of stuff to get as a, newer researcher. Maybe have some sort of like even a cheap type of sound recorder,
yeah.
start with at least something for sure. Um, my friend Aaron, hey strangers. So question, you've been headquartered in Texas for a long time. Do you feel Central Texas is underappreciated, underinvestigated regarding its high volume of paranormal phenomena?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate it. That's one of the reasons I moved here 15 years ago to this region.
Interesting.
I was living in Houston for 20 years, and I thought I started plotting cryptids on my map of Texas, and there was a big fat cluster right around San Antonio. And I was like, you got Bigfoot sightings, big bird, chupacabras, and then just other weird things. And so I thought, this, for whatever reason, I can't explain it, there seems to be a lot of that activity out here. And then, of course, when I moved out there, I learned there was also, as you would expect in a historic city, a lot of alleged haunted locations.
Mm,
Famous haunts around town, lots of weird like legends and stories. And so, yeah, San Antonio just seems to have that kind of weird, for a city, it's got kind of got that weird vibe in terms of lots of unusual and unexplained phenomenon happening nearby. UFOs. I mean, the headquarters for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network,
sure. Yeah.
the founder lived in Seguin, Texas, just outside of San Antonio, up
Okay.
until when he passed. It was a few years ago, sadly. But so, yeah, it's I think Central Texas does not get a lot of respect, or the respect it deserves, in terms of the potential that we have out here to maybe investigate some unusual occurrences.
What kind of sources are you going to, like, if you are wanting to find out, like, okay, what's the weird legends, the weird stories for a certain area? How are you doing that research usually?
You mean around the country or
like let's
more?
say I have a listener and like the listener is like, oh, I live in this town. Like, what kind of ways could they figure out like what are the
Oh,
weird legends and stories in their area? Kind of like what you did with San Antonio.
I got you. Well, probably social media, because most
Hmm.
groups that are organized that are trying to do anything at all have some kind of page or group that you can,
Sure.
or a website that you can just Google. I don't think it would be too hard. For example, if you lived in, you know, Iowa, well, maybe it'd be a little harder in Iowa, but you started looking at Iowa Bigfoot or Iowa Cryptids, and then you'd probably run into the Van Meter Festival, and you'd see some of the
Exactly.
names on there and say, "Oh, there's guys in Iowa." So I mean, yeah, just if you're going to become a researcher, that's the first step is researching and finding information, and um,
It's all about making connections as well.
yeah,
Once you
networking.
start to make networking connections, that's when you hear some stuff as well. My buddy Aaron, he's got some solid questions tonight. We're gonna put some others in here too, but I'm curious. Have you heard about the movement to pick a new nickname for the Texas Chupacabra? Has that come across your
Um,
plate?
i-
Is
is
yeah.
the new name the Texas Blue Dog? Is that the name we're talking about, or is there even a different name?
There are multiple.
Well,
There are multiple. Yeah, Paranormality magazine had a poll out, and they were trying to figure out a new nickname for the Texas Chupacabra. But do you think it fits, or do you think it might?
it, it
What are your feelings on that?
it actually, in terms of the Texas animals, and I've examined a half dozen, the remains of a half dozen of these so-called chupacabras in Texas, seen countless photographs, seen one alive myself finally a few years ago up near
Mm,
Corsicana. There are a lot of them out there. Um, the name chupacabra obviously implies that it is drinking, the goat sucker. It's drinking
exactly.
blood. And so, what I always have to remind people is the name actually describes an alleged behavior, not a physical description of any kind, which is rather confusing. But there's really no evidence that the Texas chupacabras have consumed blood. I've
Okay.
spoken to two different ranchers, farmers that raise chickens that claim that their chickens were left bloodless by these animals. But
Mm,
and I consider them to be fairly credible people, but it's just not. There's no hard evidence of that, and it would really be a remarkable adaptation. I think the most interesting theory regarding that is one of these ranchers, Phyllis Canyon, who's on a lot of the Chupacabra lady from Cuero, Texas, who has
okay.
one of these things stuffed and mounted in her living room,
Nice.
um, and has had DNA tests done and stuff. She had an interesting theory, and she works in the nutrition field. And she thought, what if these canids, we know they're dogs that have a
Right.
grotesque appearance and weird behavior patterns. What if some of these Texas chupacabras, what if they are sickly and craving certain
I've
minerals
heard
that are
that.
in the
Yep.
blood, like iron and other
Hmm.
things? That could explain why they're not actually sucking the blood out of a chicken, but maybe they kill the chicken and then they
Oh,
kind of lap
sure.
up some of the blood
Hmm.
and bleed it out, or I don't know. I mean, at
That's
least
very interesting. That's an interesting
yeah,
thought for
it was kind
sure.
of an interesting take on it. So it's not not a true vampire, but
Hmm.
something could drink blood, and that would be a weird behavior. But it not so weird if an animal has a pathology or something like that. So
There you go. Maybe just a misunderstood sickly animal. Who
yeah,
knows?
I'm
Yeah.
on the record. I'm all for rebranding the Texas version.
Hey,
It's
there we
just
go.
yeah,
That's
I'm okay with
huge.
that.
We're taking it to the bank. There you go. Tate is in the chat. He wants to say, "Hey Ken, nice meeting you at Louse Camp this past July. We were
All right.
chatting about that."
Yeah,
Um,
good to hear from Tate. Mhm.
friend Connor Bigfoot Anon. He says, so I guess there's a place called Helltown. I think it's probably in Florida. I don't know if that rings a bell. If not, do you have any good Florida stories?
Um, Florida, do we want Bigfoot, or are we looking for other cryptids?
I think he would be cool if you have anything cool cryptid related that comes to mind. I know most people think of like the swamp ape, but um
Yeah, well, Florida's got a lot of cool cryptids. That's why I bring it up, because it actually, and what's amazing about Florida, of course, is the habitat is capable of sustaining, we have clear evidence based on the number of invasive species that are thriving down there, everything from pythons to Nile crocodiles. But I had one account of a truck driver years ago told me that he was driving down Alligator Alley, which of course is that very southerly cut that cuts across Florida to Miami from the western part of the Panhandle. And he said that he saw a giant owl standing in the middle of the road one night that was about 5 feet tall. And he literally had to stop his truck because it didn't fly off. It just stood there. And of course, that's at least twice as big as any known owl.
Man.
So that's an interesting one. I spoke to a lady in the Florida Keys. Her and her mother claimed that they saw a couple of living pterosaurs, small ones flying over. Pterosaurs, of course, are the flying reptiles that lived during the Mesozoic era. There's some cool lake monsters up in Florida. There's something called Pinky, which is said to swim around in the St. Johns River there near Jacksonville. And Pinky has been described as kind of a weird reptilian, kind of a pinkish colored, fleshy reptilian sea monster. And then you also have the St. Augustine monster, which is an old story from 1892, where this giant mass of rotting flesh washed up on a beach down there. Darn it, for the life of me, I can't remember the exact beach, but right off of St. Augustine there. And this thing weighed like a ton. And
weird.
Nobody could really identify it at first. And this one natural named DeWitt Webb got involved and took photographs and hauled this thing up on the beach and finally took a flesh sample. And he thought it was a giant octopus that would be like 120 feet from the tentacle to tentacle outstretched. Wow. So that's never been scientifically verified, but it's not impossible. You could have an octopus that big down in the ocean. So Florida has a lot of cool. And one of the best hoaxed cryptids ever, which is something called three toes. And this three toes out near Clearwater on the beach. I can't remember if this was in the 50s or 60s, but there was this guy out there stomping around with he'd made these giant three-toed footprints, and he'd stomp around on the beach. And eventually it turned into a monster. It was known as three toes. And some even alleged it was a giant 15-foot penguin, since that's what the feet looked like. So, but ultimately it was proven. I think there's a guy in Florida, Robert Robinson, who's kind of gotten to the bottom of that one and saw the giant wooden stompers with the three toes.
Awesome. So I've read that. Yeah, it's a good story for
it's
sure.
It's a great hoax because it really threw people. It wasn't Bigfoot. It was like, what the heck is leaving these footprints on the beach?
So there you go, Connor. There's a whole lot of Florida cryptid stories for you. Good stuff there. Let's see. Kevin Morrison says, "Hey Ken, how do you feel? What do you like about Dr. Bindernagel and his research? Any thoughts about that? I know he was a pretty big name in the Bigfoot research field."
Yeah, huge fan of Dr. John Bindernagel. I only met him one time. I think it was back in 2002. And we had a short chat at a Bigfoot conference. He gave an amazing presentation, and such a gracious man, very welcoming and open-minded, but very brilliant. But in terms of what he brought to the field, because his specialty was as an actual wildlife biologist out in the field, and particularly in the area of British Columbia, where Vancouver Island and some of those areas out there. And so his perspective that he brought to the Bigfoot field, which was badly needed, was he really analyzing Bigfoot in terms of the behavior patterns that have been reported and fitting those within the paradigm of other great apes. And he did that beautifully in his two books. And anytime he did a presentation or whatever, it was very sad when we lost him a few years ago. I think it was everybody just thought the world of Bindernagel, and still do. I mean, we still remember his legacy, but he was definitely one of the great ones.
He's one of the guys that you don't really ever hear anyone talk bad about. And there's still a YouTube channel with a lot of his work, and of course, there's his books as well. Those are a little pricey to get a hold of right now, but maybe start with the YouTube. Um,
Yeah, great YouTube channel.
for sure, for sure. A friend, Greg from Weird says, "Hey Ken, have you ever been up to Canada to investigate cryptids?" Or I'm putting that part in, but have you ever been up to Canada to investigate? If so, where?
Yeah, actually, and I was a Canadian. I was a dual citizen,
Oh,
Canadian, half Canadian, until I was 23 because my parents migrated from Canada. So I could have retained that if I had moved to Canada at that point, but I didn't do that. But yeah, my point being that I definitely feel somewhat Canadian. But the only Canadian cryptids that I've investigated were Sasquatch in the Garibaldi mountain range up near Squamish, north of Vancouver, which was one of Rene Dahinden's favorite old haunts that he would go to. In 2014, I had an opportunity to go to that area and investigate a viral video of a alleged Sasquatch walking across a snowy mountain pass. And I also investigated a lake monster in eastern Canada called Igopogo. Everyone's heard of
I
Ogopogo
was gonna say it.
from British
Yeah,
Columbia, but
no way.
in Ontario, there's one called Igopogo that they kind
Wow.
of borrowed the name. A place
Okay.
called Lake Simcoe, which is up in Ontario near Barrie, and specifically in a Kempenfelt Bay, where this thing is known as Kempenfelt Kelly. It's a big lake, but it's rather shallow. But there's been like an Ogopogo type thing sighted there. So I did a trip up there years ago, and I may be forgetting one or two. Maybe they'll come to me, but I think those are the two that kind of to jump to mind. I would love to do more research up in Canada, specifically British Columbia, of course, because in terms of the habitat. I mean, it's just once you get north of Vancouver, it's just crazy how many contiguous miles of just pristine wilderness are there, and you have such rich native traditions regarding the Sasquatch and Bukwas, Zonaqua, and some of those other native names for these creatures.
That is awesome. Well, there you go, Greg. That's a lot of solid, good information. And it sounds like Ken is very familiar with some Canadian stuff as well. I'm going to loop back to another question from Aaron. And again, if anyone is new in the chat, right now we're talking to, again, Ken Gerhard. If you have any questions for him, we're doing audience questions. Feel free to put those in the chat. But Aaron has an interesting question. Have you heard the theory that the Kelly Airforce Base Sasquatch was an orangutan escaped for the Southwest Research Institute? And what is your opinion on that theory?
Yes, I have heard that. There's Tom Slick did found a place that was known for a long time as Southwest Biomedical Research Institute. I think the name may have been altered slightly now, but it is located on the southwest side of San Antonio. They've done biomedical research there for decades, and they have used primates. And in fact, I know a couple of people that worked there that worked with the primates. So they do have orangutans and chimps and monkeys and different things. So I mean, it is the Kelly Airforce Bigfoot sightings occurred in August of 1976, and it was actually on the edge of Kelly Air Force Base. I've investigated the location. It's now Lackland Air Force Base, but there is a lot of wide open wooded areas out there. And Southwest Medical Research is kind of in that general vicinity. So I've heard that, and I believe there was also like an auto junkyard that a few years ago captured some kind of primate on their security cameras, like running through
Oh,
their,
wow.
So
That's
but
crazy.
but my argument against that, I'd say it's not impossible that something could have gotten out and wandered over into that area where people claim they saw Bigfoot. But I'd say the evidence against that is that at least the first eyewitness described something that was 7 feet tall and was walking like a human on two legs.
Mm.
The second eyewitness, a lady named Rose Medina, who saw one out her window, said it was smaller, about the size of a 9-year-old child.
Okay.
And so that could be potentially, more feasibly something like an orangutan or a chimp or something along
Sure.
those lines. And there were some other things. There were some human-like, Bigfoot-like prints that were found in some woods around there, allegedly. And there was a giant manhole cover that something had lifted off of and moved. And there were also some cats that were found that had been mangled. So there was a lot of weird stuff going on around that incident.
Wow.
So I don't know, obviously it was a long time ago, so we don't know for sure. But yes, it is possible that, an escaped ape or primate could have contributed to that whole situation.
There you go. Good thoughts. Good thoughts. Friend Taiga Raider says, "Hey, don't forget Northwest Territories. Nahini National Park is like a holy grail for cryptids. Is that anything that's come up in your radar? That particular
Oh
area?
yeah,
Or
oh yeah.
yeah,
That's a really, yeah. I mean, the Nahani Valley, also known as Dead Men's Valley or the
right.
Valley of the Headless Men, is a pretty remote and, you know very secluded area with an air of mystery about it, obviously. But there are two significant cryptids that have been reported from that area. One being the Nukluk, which is either a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, or possibly even described more like a Neanderthal because it's more human-like and
Oh,
it's wearing
okay.
like
Weird.
furs and carrying a club. And then there's also the Wahila, which is a giant white wolf that's been reported from that area that some say is not actually a wolf but something else. So I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard it, but there was a cryptozoologist named Frank, I want to say Frank Lane, who went up there in the 1970s at the behest of Ivan T. Sanderson and
Hmm.
did an expedition. And he actually, for a while on YouTube, there was this 2-hour long interview with this Frank Lane who talked about the experiences they had up in the Nahani Valley. And any cryptozoologist would be really interested in it because he really did go there and do the expedition that people had
Wow.
often fantasized about. I think the worst part about it that I remember is he was talking about like the quantity and size of the flies there, just constantly swarming and biting them.
Oh
I
man.
was like, that was the one that was like, yeah, I'd love to go there, but
Yeah, I
I
don't
don't know
know.
about getting swarmed by giant deer flies all the time that are
Yeah.
eating me.
No thanks. I mean, Maine gets pretty wild. Like you got moose flies up there, but
Oh yeah.
who knows what's in Canada? Let's see. Friend Joe Turry, he was at the Van Meter Visitor Festival too. He says, "Hey Jeremiah, I can watch my American Monster Tour DVD as we speak. Fun, good stuff, good
Oh
stuff.
yeah,
Thank you, Joe.
cool. Yeah, Joe's done some Bigfoot documentaries and
Yeah,
really interesting guy.
Big Muddy,
I,
good stuff.
yep, he interviewed me for something he's working on, so that'll be
Oh,
interesting.
cool.
I
Yeah, yeah.
eagerly await that, Joe.
Here's a question from my friend Tate. Question: Does Ken think there's a correlation between Sasquatch and sleep paralysis? Has uh, Tate kind of talks about that in um, uncovering the truth of Sasquatch. I'm pretty sure I got that right, Tate. Let me know. But
Tate, I'm ashamed to
anything?
admit it, but no, I'm afraid I missed your thing. And so I guess the concept is that people when they're in and I've experienced sleep paralysis. It's been years,
Sure.
but you do have some pretty wild. You're kind of in this quasi conscious
Mm-hmm.
state where you almost, there were a couple times when I was experiencing sleep paralysis where I thought there was this old ugly hag, this woman that would come in my
Oh
room
wow.
and kind of hover over me. And this was years
Mm,
and years ago before I'd really looked into it. And then when I did the research, I found out that it was actually sleep paralysis is actually referred to as old hag syndrome in other
that's
parts of the world, like
okay.
Scandinavia, because many people claim to see these ugly old witches that come in and kind of hover over them. I don't know why that is, but you know what? I
Oh
think
man.
Tate, I think Sasquatch, like many cryptids, I think is really a case of composite identity or situation of composite identity. So in other words, yes, there could truly be a mysterious unknown hominid running around North America. I think that's plausible with all the evidence we've seen. But there's so many other aspects to the mystery in terms of hoaxing, delusion, periodola, people's imaginations, maybe some paranormal or, but certainly I think the main point of his question, which is very good, is I think ultimately rooted in our own psychosis or
Mm,
our
right.
psychiatric and mental state of being, because we're not perfect. We're not always perfectly lucid, and we are prone, like all things, to to be wrong and to
Right.
misinterpret think we saw things we didn't really see, or maybe just remember things in a different way. And certainly in a situation where you're experiencing sleep paralysis, it seems very real at the time. So you can be very convinced that something was happening that's not actually happening. So I think that's an interesting. I like the way he's thinking outside the box there. Good job, Tate.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Great questions tonight. As we're starting to kind of wrap things up, so I got to ask you, one, what has you most excited in the field of cryptozoology? What has your focus right now?
Oh gosh. Admittedly, I'm kind of in a little recalibration point right now.
Okay,
so
that's no problem with that.
Lyle and I got the American Monster Tour DVDs out. I did a bunch of public appearances and lectures this year. I'm already got a bunch booked for next year.
Nice.
I just filmed a TV show yesterday, just like one episode that I can't give too much information. And,
right.
And also the Loch Ness book came out at the beginning of the year. So, and I had some great expeditions, not only the giant salamander expedition, but in the end of October, a colleague and I went to north central Pennsylvania and investigated the Thunderbird traditions up there.
It's a good video.
Thank you. One thing I'm kind of excited about that hopefully will happen is I've been negotiating with some Australian producers and sponsors to try to get to Tasmania and investigate the thylacine this year. Obviously, with the COVID stuff going on, Australia has been pretty locked down, and so the fact that I'm from here, and so, but I'm hopeful. I'm going to be working on other things, but that would certainly be a dream come true to have an opportunity to go down there. I really think the thylacine is the most viable cryptid we have. I mean, we know they were around at least until the 1930s. There's no reason to think that there couldn't still be a, vulnerable breeding population somewhere.
I mean,
Tasmania
we have video of
Australia.
It. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Man, I hope you do get to go down to that area. That would be a fantastic expedition. So we'll definitely cross our fingers for that. I'm actually, we're going to end with this question. It's pretty solid. Ashley says, hey, how often do you find yourself changing your mind? Do you do a lot of introspection in regards to your thoughts and theories about all of this? That's a pretty deep question.
That is a deep question.
Yeah.
And at the risk of getting too personal, because I like Ashley and I think she's doing a great job doing her thing.
She's great. Yep.
I've recently I've done some self-discovery in the past couple of years while all this madness was going on. And I'm pretty convinced that I am a personality type INTR, which is basically an introverted, ultra analytical researcher. So, I mean, I spend,
totally.
I mean, I'm not, I love my friends and I love being social when I do that, but I'm basically here in my cave. I am just an obsessive researcher and a hyper analytical. And so I haven't really changed my mind. I mean, I jump around from cryptid to cryptid in terms of if I'm writing a book or doing a TV show. And I think that's what keeps it fresh for me, Ashley, is just having a variety of different subjects. And you can go through the rotation and say, okay, let's get back on Bigfoot and now lake monsters. And that way it doesn't get too stale. So I have that benefit of doing that. But, the two most important qualities that a successful cryptozoologist has to have, and this is not me, this is from Bernard Heuvelmans and Lauren Coleman and everyone, patience and passion, or you could say passion and patience. I think for most people, the passion is easy to come by. When you start talking about these subjects, it really gets our juices flowing. I mean, we're talking about going out and searching for legendary, monsters.
Right.
I mean, it's an exciting thing to be involved in for sure. So it's easy to get passionate, but the patience is important too. And I think, if you stay the course, and I guess that's my message here, anyone that's real serious about this, just stay the course. You're going to hit some road bumps for sure. But the people that I've seen kind of rise to the top or accomplish things are the people that have kind of had a game plan or a strategy and maybe altered it a little bit here and there, but basically stayed the course and stuck to their guns, and ultimately they accomplished great things. So hopefully that answered your question. I don't know.
Good stuff.
rambled too much there, but
great question, Ashley, for sure.
yes, thank you.
For people that maybe new to your stuff, what are the best ways that people can keep up to date with what you're doing, and what new things from you do you want people to check out? How about that?
Well, thank you, Jeremiah. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah,
Great,
totally.
like you said, great audience, great questions. I enjoyed your questions as well. You do a great interview. I'm all over social media: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I've got a YouTube channel if people want to check out some of my cryptozoology videos. Go to my Amazon author page if you're interested in any of my 6 books.
Totally.
And I'm currently appearing on a series called The Proof Is Out There on History Channel, which, by the way, in just a few minutes, they're going to be airing a new Bigfoot special with Meldrum and Bill Munns and talking about the Patterson Gimlin film. So I don't know, but they've done a good job with that show. So it should be interesting. So
good stuff. So we got, thanks, buddy, from Ashley. Keith Rowland says, great question, great answer. And Tyga Raider says, this is awesome. Thanks so much. But thank you all for hanging out in the chat tonight. And thank you so much, Ken, for hanging out with us and chatting cryptozoology for an hour. We appreciate all you're doing, and keep up the good work. Have a great night, all.
Thank you.